to thank Hadzimuhamedovic and Dr. Zaki Aslan for accepting our invitation. After the speeches are completed, we will forward your questions to our colleagues in the question and answer part. If you have questions, we ask you to write in the chat box. Today, our first speaker is Dr. Zaki Aslan. He is architect, planner, cultural heritage advisor, and also professor of practice, College of Architecture, American University of Sharjah. Zaki Aslan, he served for 20 years, more than 20 years, as the founding director of ICROM Sharjah Regional Conservation Center. We know him there in UAE, where he led programs for the Arab region from Rome, Italy, and later from Sharjah, he led projects, offered technical guidance on heritage conservation and management, national planning policies, also work heritage field projects with the international organizations like UNESCO, European Union, and British Council. Today, Dr. Zaki's speech title is What Future to Our Past? Cultural heritage places and artwork in the regional context. Dr. Zaki, the floor is yours. Please, you can share your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ertugrul. I'm so pleased to be here with you, especially with my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Amra Hadzimuhamedovic, to share with you some of my somehow personal experience during the past 2 decades that you mentioned, 21 years at ICROM, and where we are now in the field of conservation and how the needs have evolved during the past 20 years and so. So I will share my presentation to start explaining this. Can you see the screen?
Yep, we can see.
Okay. Well, as you know, there are several heritage places in the world, and we have been trying to work, being a World Heritage, but also other types of sites in the field of cultural heritage. Lately, the situation has evolved. We have more pressing needs to address issues of destruction and reconstruction of cultural heritage in these important places. I'm so sorry, there is music which I don't know how to stop. Do you hear the music, by the way? There's
No music.
It's a bit weird. I don't know.
Fatih, arkada sesi açık olan varsa kapatsana, Zaki hariç.
It will stop. Okay. So within these heritage places everywhere in the region in particular, there are important historic cities. We see here the city of Shibam in Yemen. On the right-hand side, we can see also cultural landscapes from the Middle East. In this case, it's north of Jordan, overlooking the Tabaria Lake in North Palestine. And when we started to work on the needs related to protection of cultural heritage 20 years ago, we were aware of the fact that urban development was really pressing in this part of the world. This is a picture from Beirut. At that time, I'm talking about 20 years ago, meaning 2003, 2004, where these were the issues. And a site which was at the cliff of this hill called Nahr al-Kalb was protected through diverting actually the highways so that they won't harm the site itself. But also, if we move eastward towards the Gulf countries also witnessed a lot of loss and somehow destruction of their cultural heritage due to development. And after the oil discovery and the oil boom, cities like Sharjah, here what we see in the screen, lost much of its cultural heritage that we can see part of on the screen on the right, and I will show more pictures of that. And planners who came from either the West, mainly from Britain or France in the region, they actually looked at these places as places where there should be development. And this actually, main street, flanked by two series of modern buildings from the 1970s, in fact, divided the city into two parts, the historic city. Other issues we looked at the time related to urban development, issues related to how we could provide new infrastructure with new amenities. This is the case of the city of Algiers
Bir de benim
in
sesimi
Algeria,
açabilirsin.
and where there was a need to improve the transportation system through developing tunnels and metro. So that requested planning, good planning for preventive, what we call preventive archaeology, to safeguard the archaeology which would be affected by such development. In some of the areas that we have in the Middle East, in particular, we have different layers of history. In this case, is the city of Busra in the south of Syria, where you have vernacular architecture, but also archaeology underneath. The French and foreign missions of archaeology were actually digging to find, new research, knowledge and archaeological finds at the expense of the vernacular architecture of this living city of Busra. So how we address the balance between research and conservation was also at stake at that time. So demolition of the recent vernacular fabric in this case at the expense of archaeology and looking at the Roman archaeology without respecting the accumulation of different layers of history, particularly many of this was built during the Ottoman period were lost. Also in 2006 we had the war in Lebanon, and that just an image where the oil spill in the city of Byblos affected the walls of the city and the archaeological remains of the city. The city of Aleppo, at that time, we were talking about totally different issues as we talk about now. We were talking more about how we manage the traffic, how we can reduce the pollution, how we preserve the citadel, the important citadel from the Ayyubid and the Seljuk periods, how we could safeguard the city, how we make it viable to its inhabitants. And also we were talking about archaeological finds and archaeological sites which were uncovered and were left after excavations to the weathering factors and how we protect these places in the region at large. Also, during this time, in the first, between the years 2000 and 2010, there was a lot of interest in developing museums and in upgrading also existing museums in the region, particularly in the Gulf, where you can see here several new museums such as the Doha Museum, the Islamic Museum in Doha, and many other museums, the Louvre, which was built a bit later. So there was a lot of interest in upgrading and development of the places where archaeological finds are finding refuge and presented to the public and protected for enjoyment of the people. And in places like Oman on the left and places like Damascus on the right, we were trying to develop also methods of how best we can conserve existing structures. On the right, it's the souk of Damascus, which was built on the Roman remains, and also how we could treat buildings such as this fort in Nizwa in the Sultanate of Oman. So we were talking about these issues at the time, and we have developed a lot of methodologies and capacity building programs to address all these needs. Talking about the types of heritage, we also looked at industrial heritage. These are the waterways from Hama in Syria, but also we were talking about how we can sustain these places and reutilize the water management systems. In this case, it's the system that exists in the city of Basra, which I just showed a moment ago, and how we could maybe use that for the benefit of the people and the local inhabitants of this historic city. And at that time, roughly in 2000, if you remember, 2003, we had a war in Iraq. So we had some destruction, like this picture on the right from Samarra, where we had destruction of heritage. We started to talk about how we address issues of reconstruction, in this case in Samarra. And in cities like Erbil, the citadel that you can see below in Kurdistan, Iraq, we were also talking about how we can encourage the inhabitants to stay in the city. So we were talking about urban livelihoods and how we could encourage an integrated approach to conserving historic cities of this type. And I mentioned archaeological sites, such as this site of Baalbek, how we manage sites, how we manage visitors, how we manage excavations, and of course, Jerusalem, which is the picture on the upper part, was always something we were following as to how we can protect the city through partnerships of local institutions such as the Welfare Association, which we worked with closely to build the capacity of people who were working in this field. We were telling people at the time that there is an evolution of conservation approaches, which started some time ago, as you see here on the screen, with traditional approaches to conservation, and then we came to understand the theories of Viollet-le-Duc and then Ruskin, all Western theories that we were learning, of course, from the conservation masters, as to say, and theoreticians, and we were looking at the different approaches, like the theory of Brandy, and the Italian approaches, French, British, etc. Because they were the ones who were actually most interested in this area at the time. Then there was some kind of more awareness about how we should develop cultural heritage in our region, the Arab and Muslim region, how we could look at specificities and the meanings and the significance of our places, perhaps in a different way, not only thinking about the material, but also thinking about the intangibles and the people who are the first beneficiaries of these places. So, so this evolution of conservation theory, which we took and we took forward since that time, especially when we started to talk about sustainable development, the ecological approaches, and how we can look into preserving the built environment and the environment at large, began to be more visible towards the year 2000. As I mentioned, the intangible aspects of heritage were quite important, and in addition to looking at these places as structures, we also were looking at these places as places for people, and we can always address this in an integrated approach. That's why we started to talk about issues related to public participation, how we benefit the people, the local people, from the various actions and interventions we do in the historic built environment. During that time, there was an important document which was called the Nara document, held in Nara, the city of Nara in Japan. And I think Dr. Amra will be talking a little bit more about the authenticity aspect, where there was a clear difference between the Western approaches and how this has also evolved even in the West to understand the logic behind the intangible dimensions of cultural heritage, especially related to people, how the places are used, and how what spirit these places have, in addition to the very tangible aspects like the material design and the workmanship. So this has evolved at the time, and instead of looking only at the natural causes and the human causes of deterioration or destruction, some of them, of course, are slow, such as climatic conditions, pollution, salts, humidity, etc. We were also looking at the very immediate drastic effects, which were either natural or man-induced, such as, for example, we were more aware of how we deal with earthquakes, with floods. So this has become, something that we were trying to address towards the 2010 and around this period, and also with wars and conflicts happening in this part of the world, we were reflecting on how the West dealt with the destroyed cities in Europe after the Second World War, and how we can develop new approaches to benefit our region. So instead of course, we were looking also at the conditions of cities, the increase of the population in urban areas, the migration, and issues related to how these cities are becoming places for people at this time, we talk about 55% of the global population living in cities, and in 2050 we are talking about 70% of people and inhabitants living in cities. So the urban conservation and the urban aspects of heritage have become more and more important, and at that time we started to address what we called at the time integrated urban and territorial conservation, in which we integrate the multi-sectoral dimensions of managing heritage in places like these. This is another picture of the city of Shiban in Yemen, and this one is from Cairo. Cairo is a very chaotic city with different issues that we were addressing at that time. Again, we were also at that time, we were looking at Sana'a and cities in Yemen in the same approach. We developed curricula as to how we build capacities through university programs together with our Yemeni partners. So again, I'm going back to places like the Gulf. The Gulf cities where they developed, like this one is a map from Sharjah. As I mentioned, if you look at the map, you can see a coherent city that was in evolution gradually, and towards in the 80s and later on, we can see more loss of the urban historic fabric, and then also, as I mentioned, this is just one example to show you the planning and the modern planning of these cities, how it affected also the fabric itself. So there was an intention at one point to look at reconstructing and reconnecting this city of Sharjah, and how they can reconstruct the original fabric. And of course, this was a big debate because the modern buildings acquired their significance by time, and they became part of the history of the place. So there were people who were against and people who are with reconstruction or keeping the modern heritage, which became more important as it acquired time and in this place. Again, this is the visual of what I'm talking about, how this affected such cities, with the main actually fort of the city being in the middle of these two lines of development of modern architecture at that time. So of course the modernists would want to preserve these modern structures. So what do we do? And here you can see the differences between the old and the new and how the fabric was gradually lost. So at that time, up to 2010, let's say, we were looking at a current context at the time, where not only in our region but also abroad. I mean, we were talking about rapid urbanization, as I mentioned, unsustainable development processes, and poorly planned cities and historic areas, and deterioration of the urban quality. And we talked about various issues ranging from, as I mentioned earlier, population growth, excessive building density, social isolation, until we started to talk about, of course, we could talk about also improper infrastructure, social isolation in any plans we were doing, and then we were starting to talk more and more about armed conflict and disasters and climate change. So this necessitated at the time to look at, we have to look at the heritage resource, such as historic cities, not only between professionals and policymakers, but also how we can involve the public and what benefits the public might have in this process. So we were talking about stakeholders at large. And we can see that the conservation field evolved at that time, at the turn of the century, let's say, from looking at monuments and sites to living cities and cultural landscapes, from restoration to urban regeneration and managing processes of change, from monodisciplinary to integrative and participatory planning, and from protection of buildings and single buildings to preservation of urban values. And there we were also talking about a very important concept, that conservation is about management of change and how the change would affect the significance, and in the case of World Heritage, the outstanding universal value, and how we can manage this change by putting the right plans, and if we have implemented projects, how we can assess the impact of these projects on the urban historic environment. And of course, at that time also, the UN promoted the Sustainable Development Goals, and none of these goals explicitly talk about culture or heritage. However, the Sustainable Development Goal number 11 talked about sustainable cities and communities, and there we can fit, of course, the historic urban areas within the global concept of a city and towns. And therefore, UNESCO took action in this direction and provided a document looking at the culture as central element of development and sustainable development. And this is also available online. So quickly, in the past 50 years of the 20th century, we have witnessed an evolution. In the 60s, there was industrialization. We were talking about education, especially after the Second World War, the establishment of organizations such as UNESCO, the CROM, addressing these issues. In the 70s, we were talking about ecology, energy crisis, so we were talking in the 80s, we were talking more about development and focus on science and technology. We were talking about materials conservation and how we can improve technology. And in the 90s, when we had more market economy and also conflicts and disasters, and after that, we were talking about how we manage and revive historic areas in an integrated approach. And in the 2000s, when we had the new Convention on Cultural Diversity and Intangible Heritage, we looked at the different other dimensions, which led to the what we call in 2010 the historic urban landscape, from this notion of cultural landscape and how we look at cities in that lens. Very quickly, the historic cities in the region have been at risk due to all these reasons that I've just mentioned, and you can see here on the screen the transformation, the climate change, the commodification of cultural heritage, and the damage to the historic cities, also due to armed conflict. And this is why we started, and I started with my colleagues at that time, a program to address historic cities called Medina. And we try to use what's called the historic urban landscape approach, where we look at the historic layering of cultural and natural values and attributes of cultural heritage and broaden the urban context and its geographic setting by addressing the layers of what a city contains, ranging from geology, topography, land uses, built environment, spaces, social and cultural practices, economic processes, and the intangible heritage relevant to diversity and identity. And we talked about, of course, the integration of culture and nature in places like these in Yemen, for example, the agricultural terraces. We, at the time, we were trying to reflect on what happened in Beirut when the reconstruction was done without, adequate participation of the local owners and communities. In the reconstruction process, Beirut became an archaeological, a large area for research, and many of the lessons that took a commercial direction were great lessons for later reconstruction efforts later on. And of course, you know the experience from Monster, and I'm sure Dr. Amra will talk about that, and how that also influenced our views of how we look at issues related to reconstruction after the war. So, in addition to wars in Lebanon, Iraq, and also the Arab Spring in Egypt and other places, we were also addressing issues related to disasters, not only in our region, but also outside, such as these pictures from the Notre Dame Cathedral, if you remember, or this fire in the National Museum Brazil in 2018, lack of planning and preventive plans to save the heritage. And in our region, we have different images from Syria, Palmyra, and from Yemen, from Sana'a. We have to deal with all these issues, and these are also images from Syria, from Iraq, and Yemen. So a lot of lessons will have to be learned, and we were lacking guidance and principles of how we address such idea of reconstruction. The looting was at its best. These are images from the looting that took place in the Museum of Palmyra, and how the local authorities at the time safeguarded and took all these objects to safe havens in Damascus. And these pictures show the looting that nurtured by ISIS, and this is a letter actually from the leader of ISIS informing people how they can utilize heritage for their economic benefit. And many, many pictures I can show you from Iraq, from Niwa here, and from Egypt. If you remember, the Institut d'Egypte in Cairo was also on fire, which actually His Highness the ruler of Sharjah helped to provide them with copies he had from the manuscripts that existed there. Images from Syria, the Umayyad mosque, which was destroyed in Aleppo, and this is before and after this important monuments that we have in the region. The use of technology was very important, the use of drones, satellite technology to compare before and after. But more than that, we were trying also to address and communicate why heritage is important and how, because there was always an argument, is saving cultural heritage important as saving people? And in fact, this is a quotation from The Guardian that looks at this by understanding the importance of the, the relationship between heritage and people. This is an example of the ancient Palmyra statues and how the author of this article looked at this by talking about our human story and connecting our connection as human beings to these phases of history and how we are civilized if we cherish and appreciate the memory. And he was arguing that ruins are not dead and they are living because they are part of our human being and humanity. And based on that, we have also published several guidelines for our professionals, one related to risk management, the other related to evacuation in emergency situations, always looking back at lessons we learned from the Beirut experience, here where how they safeguarded the cultural heritage during the civil war in the basement of the museum by using these concrete panels, and how the city was reconstructed. You can see before and after pictures here. And also we were involved in Mosul projects and other projects after the Beirut blast. In fact, example from Beirut blast and the port there was a lot of discussion about the silos and the conservation of the silos, but also the people of Beirut learned a lot about their previous experience and how they can address the stabilization and reconstruction of the existing buildings that you see here at the upper part of the screen, how they developed approaches based on the guidance that we worked with them hand in hand to develop. Issues were also important. These are also images from Palmyra. Again, in Beirut, as I mentioned, people were not, at the time, up to the 90s, we were not happy about the reconstruction and the Solidaire-led project. And that actually was a very important lesson they learned for the latest reconstruction. I'm going to be quick a little bit because I think I need to conclude. We had several meetings also learning from Europe, European cities. This is the meeting we had at the Louvre Lens. And we addressed the issue of the importance of documentation of cultural heritage. There was also a document that was devised and issued based on this meeting that we had in Rome. And also we contributed to what was called the Warsaw Recommendations for Recovery and Reconstruction, which took place in Poland, in Warsaw, and we translated it also into Arabic, but we contributed also to the content. And moving from the notion of reconstruction to the notion of recovery was also at the heart of the work that was promoted also through the work we had with UNESCO and the World Bank. Here you can see also a picture of me and Dr. Amra at this meeting, because in fact this notion of recovery, especially post-trauma recovery in the reconstruction process is quite important. And we looked at recovery and reconstruction in a very holistic manner, not only about the cultural heritage reconstruction, where we have analysis, planning, and implementation, but we look at the various sectorial aspects of recovery, ranging from urban, social, economic recovery, where you have cross-sectoral interventions. Lastly, I want to mention that in addition to the publications we had in this area, we led a project that Dr. Amra also actively took part in, and I think she will talk about it now, about using these case studies to develop guidance for cultural heritage recovery and reconstruction. And I end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zaki. Very nice presentation. Also, you gave important details and also general evaluation of the cultural heritage in the world and also especially in Islamic world. Thank you for your presentation. Now our second speaker is Amra Hadzimuhamedovic. She's director of the Center for Cultural Heritage International Forum, Bosnia. She has been a leading heritage expert in the process of implementation of the Annex 8 of the Dayton Peace Accord for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and managing diverse projects of integrating cultural heritage into post-war recovery in Bosnia, Kosovo, Palestine, and Iraq. She has worked as a consultant for UNESCO, ICROM, and World Bank and other international organizations. Now she continues to share her experiences with young professional candidates in the academic environment. Today her speech title is Authenticity and the Identity in the Muslim Heritage Practices Today. She will share valuable knowledge with us. Floor is yours, Amra. You can share your presentation.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and I would like to thank Dr. Zaki for this very comprehensive, almost 360 degrees presentation on the perception of heritage practices and how they evolve in the Muslim context. I hope that my presentation will be in a way complementary, that's only the hope, to what Dr. Zaki has presented, and it will be more based on the focusing on a particular issue, on identity, on authenticity and identity in Muslim heritage practices today. The word authenticity has represented a conundrum for global heritage academic experts and policy-making fora since the Venice Charter was adopted by ICOMOS in 1964. The first paragraph of its preamble ends with a famous commitment: it is our duty to hand them on in the full richness of their authenticity. Authenticity is not explicitly defined in the Charter, but the 23 experts who worked on the draft attributed two values to the monuments: historical and artistic. The measure of those values was expressed exclusively in material and form. Since 1964, the meaning of the full richness of their authenticity has been challenged in various regional, cultural, societal, historic, and the object of conservation contexts. That has resulted in several programmatic documents and publications for the Asian, African, American, and Eastern European contexts. All these documents conclude that authenticity is not absolute, that only few values are universal, and that their perception varies by cultural and regional context. The norm of authenticity is not even translatable to some cultures. During an early discussion on heritage and authenticity, Azedin Beshaus noted that Arabic does not even have a word for authentic. Nobuo Ito, a Japanese expert, made a similar remark on the concept's translatability to Japanese culture. Other languages have admitted authenticity as a loan word, and for the most part a plastic one, so that translating it would only restrict its meaning. Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, and Montenegrin, for example, use two words with quite different meanings to translate it, izvornost and vjerodostojnost, which refer to originality and faithfulness, respectively. Cultural heritage practices in Muslim contexts are highly nuanced when it comes to evaluation, conservation, maintenance, and management, or how they are used to shape social and economic relations. Such heritage is perpetuated nowadays through vernacular heritage practices, mainly by many mutually overlapping heritage communities that live in contexts culturally articulated as Muslim, but that do not necessarily consist solely of Muslims. Any insistence of monolithicity or the special nature of Muslim local heritage practices risks sliding into over-easy essentialization, not least thanks to its own inner conceptual orientalization or Orientalism. To avoid the trap of the monolicity, and taking into consideration that this year marks the 20th anniversary since completing the reconstruction of the old bridge in Mostar, I have decided to focus my lecture on authenticity and identity in Muslim heritage practices, using this case as a central theme at these IRCICA talks. Shall I move this? The destruction of Old Bridge in Mostar on 9 November 1993 represented the beginning of a new era in the approach to heritage globally. The image of the bridge, its fragments cascading into the river, encapsulated the destruction of thousands of buildings, towns, and villages in Bosnia and the wider region. And more even than that, it became an informal, universal symbol for all the destruction of heritage that has marked the contemporary age and the mandatory point of reference for any discussion of the role of reconstruction of damaged or destroyed heritage in processes of transitional justice. What has made the Old Bridge such a powerful argument for the world community's global responsibility for protecting cultural heritage during armed conflict? Slavenka Drakulic, a Croatian writer and intellectual, asks, why do we feel more pain looking at the image of destroyed bridge than the image of massacred people? Her response provides us with a kind of modern anthropological definition of the heritage. We namely see our own mortality in the collapse of monuments. We expect people to die. We count on our lives to end. The destruction of a monument to civilization is something else. She says, the bridge, in all its beauty and grace, was built to outlive us. It was an attempt to grasp eternity. It transcended our individual destiny. The Old Bridge is the central node within the historic townscape of Mostar and formative of the city's identity. Both point of passage over the river and public square. It is a civil and a sacred building at one and the same time. A specially placed stone at the highest point of its arch serves for the call to prayer, for adhan, in the mosque built on its left flank that you can see here at this image. This makes Stari Mosque a unique bowing minaret. The placement of the bridge's arch above the river, flowing below untouched by the bridge, which rests on the canyon's rocky sides, and the stone complexes of the towers and shops on its left and right flank, complete what is surely one of the most harmonious cultural vistas in the history of architecture. The first phase of grieving was almost the same in all Bosnian cases. The issue of remembering wounds inflicted during the war became the most appealing one. That is why, during the first phase, Bosnian people demanded ruins to be preserved and monumentalized as the memorials not only to destruction, but to war crimes in general. The new symbolic meaning of bridging diversities and reconciling divisions was imprinted onto the bridge once it was destroyed. Indeed, the bridge assumed the role of connecting East and West only after its collapse, illustrating the violent bifurcation of Bosnian society as reflected in the imposition of the quote-unquote East-West stereotype during the war against Bosnia. The question of reconstruction of the bridge was the subject of a number of consultations between the UNESCO Division of Cultural Heritage and Bosnian experts immediately after the first shock had been transformed into the collective claiming justice through the heritage restoration. Since time when experts and divers had identified the fragments of the bridge at the bottom of the riverbed, and the first stones had been pulled out from the water, the bridge range of interpretative possibilities raised. In the context of the rebuilding of Old Bridge, a number of points for discussion. The proposals that arose from those expert discussions ranged from conserving and preserving the ruins as a memorial, through replicating the form of the bridge in contemporary materials, to creating a close or perfect replica of the old bridge. Armani and Blasi and Hanna, for example, considered that the design objective of the reconstruction was to build new structures similar to the destroyed bridge in a new material. Andrea Bruno, on the other side, considered that a full story should be narrated through the reconstruction. I proposed not to rebuild the bridge, says he, as it was, but only to keep the remaining parts as an example to show that we cannot just destroy heritage. I followed the original shape with a metallic structure. I also kept the small bridge they had built immediately after the destruction to still be able to cross the river. These are the words of Andrea Bruno. This means, he continues, that we could see at the same time the three different phases: the original bridge that was destroyed, the preliminary crossing, and finally the proposed metallic structure of the project. It would be a testimony of the things that should not be done. Andrea Bruno, these discussions could be nicely summed up in the following quotation of Andre Denayer, who said, "The study of projects born from conservation and controversies they have raised shows that in the area of conservation of monuments, like in politics, it's often necessary to look for a compromise between what is desirable, what is acceptable, and what is achievable. The debate on authenticity and the layers of the memory to be impressed into the reconstructed bridge were influenced by the emotions of the people who wanted the known old bridge to be restored as an expression of justice and symbol of restored framework for the life that they appreciate. The shift from the initial determination to keep the ruins as a statement, never forget, to the demand for a complete restoration might be explained by the words of Freud, written in 1916. When once the mourning is over, it will be found that our high opinion of the riches of civilization has lost nothing from our discovery of their fragility. We shall build up again all that war has destroyed, and perhaps on firmer ground and more lastingly than before. Given the debate on authenticity that always follows any attempt at reconstruction, Article 13 of the Nara document that Dr. Zaki Aslan has mentioned and explained the rationale after it, offers a method corresponding to the demand for authenticity insofar as it affirms the relative and contextual authenticity of each property. Documentation and detailed pre-war records of Old Bridge in Mostar minimize the threat of conjectures. The reconstruction of Old Bridge in Mostar was significant in the process of peace settlement in Bosnia. In the perception from outside, it somehow sublimed all the Bosnian heritage destroyed during the war. It was some kind of performing the new paradigm of global responsibility for heritage through the involvement of the numerous stakeholders, led by UNESCO and World Bank. Inside the community, the reconstruction was performed as a ritual, complementing in a way the rituality of its destruction and mourning. The case of Stari Most, Old Bridge in Mostar, informs that the whole process is much more about the intangible than physical reconstruction. While transcending the individual destinies, the reconstructed bridge encapsulates the individual human traumas and sufferings. As Andrea Kona said, it is the powerful effect that unsettles the bifurcated and speaks ambiguously to multi-temporal present. The old bridge area of the old city of Mostar was inscribed on the World Heritage List in 2005, underlying the unlimited, this is a quote unquote, underlying the unlimited efforts of human solidarity for peace and powerful cooperation in the face of overwhelming catastrophes, as the decision says, stressing that it belongs to the category of sites of consciousness, which is why it was inscribed on the World Heritage List under criterion 6 alone. And that is still something that we discuss as the, are all these tangible values, have they been lost through the reconstruction? Its very nomination and inscription process was charged with a heated debate on reconstruction versus authenticity, even in the World Heritage Committee and among the experts of e-commerce. Triggered by destruction of Bosnian heritage, the reconstruction emerged as a significant aspect within the global discourse of heritage practices, despite having been previously excluded. This shift was further on driven by the destruction of heritage during conflicts and an increased occurrence of disasters after the war against Bosnia, especially in Syria, Iraq, Sudan, Yemen, Rwanda, Uganda, Palestine, Myanmar, China, etc. The topic of reconstruction gained its prominence after the 39th session of the World Heritage Committee in 2015, when it became a regular point of discussion in decisions related to the condition of World Heritage Sites. During its 40th session in 2016, the committee acknowledged that the existing provision in Article 86 of the operational guidelines was insufficient in addressing the complex challenges posed by reconstruction. In 2019, ICROM and ICOMOS collaborated to commission an analysis of range of case studies in recovery and reconstruction, which Dr. Zaki also mentioned, and managed the whole process together with Mary-Laure Lavenier from ICOMOS. And the goal was encompassing diverse scenarios. The important action continued in tailoring ICOMOS-ICROM guidance on post-disaster and post-conflict recovery and reconstruction for heritage places of cultural significance. And World Heritage Cultural Properties, published in December 2023, recently. ICOMOS-ICROM guidance addresses the impact of catastrophes on cultural heritage, often triggering reconstruction efforts due to personal and societal trauma. It offers guidance for cultural heritage recovery, emphasizing meticulous planning, open dialogue, research, and comprehensive documentation in recovery and reconstruction. Engaging affected communities to foster healing, social cohesion, resilience, and sustainable development is vital. The primary goal is a context-sensitive recovery approach, preserving the significance and outstanding universal value of heritage properties to the fullest extent possible. The analysis of cases involving the reconstruction of 22 heritage places has revealed significant disparities in context and the traditions of value attribution. Simultaneously, 6 critical cross-cutting issues have been identified. These issues include the imperative for social justice, continuous response, local ownership of outcomes, provision and management of resources, sustainability, and a delicate balance between authenticity and resilience. Drawing from this knowledge, the guidance aims to propose a context-attentive, value-based, inclusive, participative, people-centered, sustainable, resilient, and risk-informed recovery approach. After thoroughly reviewing a vast array of policy documents and publications spanning various fields, as well as analyzing the comments made on the 2017 ICOMOS working document, the drafting group, consisting of Luisa Del Marco, Lachlan Kelly, and myself, crafted a proposal. This proposal underwent several rounds of discussion and revision within the task force comprised of the following members: Nasir Arafat, Zaki Aslan, Catherine Forbes, Mary-Laure Lavenier, Jonathan Nsbuga, Rohit Ranjekar, Renata Schneider, and Susan Denier, from different parts of the world and working with the different roles in heritage practices. Additionally, the text takes into consideration the anticipated feedback from ICOMOS board members, ICROM staff and experts, and ICOMOS international scientific committees. The guidance is primarily intended for heritage conservation experts and all individuals responsible for safeguarding and conserving heritage places on site. In the context of World Heritage, its target audience includes state parties, their partners, their pertinent authorities, implementing agencies, and technical personnel within relevant sectors. Moreover, it can provide valuable support to various community stakeholders, including civil society, in orchestrating response to disasters and recovery efforts. The guidance identifies crucial elements essential for a successful recovery process, examines their interconnectedness, and arranges them into a comprehensive framework. This framework is organized thematically and encompasses factors related to the heritage place and the disruptive events, factors related to organizational aspects, and factors related to the anticipated outcomes. It is important to note that guidance doesn't adhere to the typical linear sequence often found in documents describing recovery processes. This deviation is motivated by two interconnected reasons. Firstly, the occurrence of catastrophes and the subsequent recovery actions seldom conform to linear sequences. Secondly, many of these factors require attention at various stages of the recovery process. Certain factors, such as capacity building, documentation, and community engagement, are considered cross-cutting elements that should be factored into the preparatory phases and sustained throughout the response to a catastrophe. The factors in response to catastrophe are organized under three main headings: comprehensive documentation of the heritage place before the traumatic event, covering both tangible and intangible aspects, with particular focus on well-defined and documented attributes of the values. Documenting the nature of the catastrophe, whether human-caused or arising from natural hazards, which can vary in terms of duration, sudden, short, protracted, intermittent, focus on cultural artifacts of general, and sometimes overlap with other events. And three, recovery actions whose implementation is contingent upon unique circumstances and contexts, and there may be instances of their overlap or repetition as events unfold. In general, recovery actions include documentation of the effects of the destructive event, assessment of impacts on heritage significance or outstanding universal value, heritage protection and reconstruction during the recovery process, development of strategy for the recovery and preservation of heritage significance, provisions for reviewing outcomes. The guidance suggests that reconstruction programs and projects should inherit a flexible recovery strategy, accommodating varied timelines due to the complex heritage sites and diverse community needs, and should embrace gradual consensus building and local engagement for effective recovery. In the section Organizational Factors, the document emphasizes the importance of identifying relevant actors in heritage place recovery, including governmental bodies, emergency services, cultural institutions, local communities, traditional authorities, property owners, experts, and displaced persons. Effective response requires robust communication networks, coordination with emergency authorities, and collaboration with local and international organizations. The recovery process should align with broader strategies and prioritize transparency in decision making. Interdisciplinary expertise, including local knowledge, is crucial for effective response. Adequate resource allocation, capacity building, and training are essential elements of heritage recovery. Building local community engagement and knowledge is highlighted along with the need for inclusive and transparent processes. The guidance document emphasizes that recovery should be a forward-looking process, guaranteeing the preservation, resilience, and sustainability of cultural heritage in the face of hazards. Key outcome factors in the heritage recovery process to be considered from its inception include disaster risk reduction, documentation of tangible and intangible attributes, climate action, communication networks, coordination, integration of heritage protection in broader recovery processes, capacity building, education, and the transfer on intergenerational knowledge. It is important to stress that this guidance document intentionally avoids prescribing specific actions and does not function as a manual or toolkit. Instead, it offers a flexible framework to support heritage place recovery efforts. Its primary aim is to address the traumatic impacts of destruction and loss. To prevent document proliferation, it provides an adaptable framework enriched by 52 cross-referenced policy documents, manuals, and toolkits. Drawing from the extensive expertise of ICOMOS and ICROM, this guidance integrates heritage place recovery into existing heritage policy and broader heritage initiatives. Only 4 core concepts, recovery, reconstruction, trauma, and resilience, are explicitly defined. It aligns with United Nations terminology to the extent possible to enhance heritage integration into the cluster approach employed during humanitarian emergencies and recovery. Being the flexible framework, the guidance encourages adaptation to evolving needs and knowledge with periodic revisions and vision to ensure relevance and inclusivity. There is nothing strange in questions of authenticity and integrity having remained largely on the margins of debate over cultural heritage practices in Muslim contexts. There are many reasons why forms of cultural heritage protection that are alternative to internationally standard approaches, whose core determinant is authenticity, are to be found in Muslim contexts. The concept of authenticity itself faces challenges related to prevalent non-material forms of value attribution and methods for perpetuating heritage in Muslim contexts. Their identity is privileged over authenticity, and substance, material, and even form are not necessarily the barriers of identity. As well as providing, for example, Oleg Grabar says that the barriers of the identity are the people who use the heritage. As well as providing a traditional cultural foundation for methods of handing on knowledge and memory, such practices significantly affect the existential reality of heritage that has suffered mass destruction and whose heritage community has been put at a physical distance from their built heritage. In such a reality, the very concept of integrity is challenged as well. Grabar notes regarding the reception of what can and cannot be changed in the practices of ensuring continuity that nothing in the Dome of Rock actually dates from the 7th century. According to him, everything from the exterior and the decorations to the ceilings, except for part of the mosaics, dates from 20th century. But he nonetheless concludes that it is a building from 691. In discussing the intellectual challenge involved in this identity paradox, noted sometimes as a paradox of Thesser's bow, as Plutarch described it 75 years before Christ, Graeber draws attention to the specific nature of the bearer of authenticity in buildings whose value lies in their sacred character. He makes clear that sacred buildings are not subject to the same norms of non-reconstructability as works of art. Icons, he says, can be reproduced and remain what they are. The Mona Lisa can. In his analysis of Muslim views on the destruction of the Kaaba, O'Mara refers to an interesting principle for the discussion on authenticity. The Kaaba is a replica of heavenly original, which is not subject to destruction. Destroying and rebuilding it has no impact on its authenticity or the original nature of the unchanging prototype. The form in which it is to be reconstructed is always the same and known, in the same place, with the same orientation, because it's always a copy of celestial Kaaba. From these two examples, for understanding Muslim heritage conservation practices, we may conclude that authenticity is less important than identity for the formation of heritage within Muslim contexts. Future studies may usefully focus on the taxonomy of factors, determining whether a particular building has an unalterable shape or form, so that its values can only be preserved in that way, while others may be able to continue expressing those values and identities as they nonetheless undergo process of constant change. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Amra. Especially I want to thank you for your comprehensive presentation explaining the theoretical framework related to your title, Authenticity and the Identity. When you were showing your presentation, I remember the book, The Bridge on Drina, about the Mostar Bridge. After the wars, especially in Islamic world, after the wars and conflict, reconstruction immediately comes to mind. But as you mentioned, as you explained, this process needs more paying attention to discuss and to keep authenticity and integrity of the cultural heritage in Islamic world. We have to think about this issue several times and discuss it on public and with the experts. Thank you again for your presentation. Now, if it's question answer time. If our attendees want to ask questions, we can accept their questions. Burayı görebiliyor muyum ben?
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Majduri Bafani. I'm speaking on behalf of the historical city administration board in Tripoli, Libya. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Zaki and Dr. Amra for their presentation. It was very enriching for me and my organization also. I would like to ask just one question. What are the ideas for, let's say, conservation and rehabilitation of sites that were destroyed in Derna in last September regarding Daniel hurricane that was caused by Daniel hurricane? Like, how can we prohibit these, rehabilitate these places? Some of them have been destroyed, all of them have been destroyed. Some of them were harmed partly. So how can we as a society work on, like, put on the international field regarding conserving them?
You want to say something, Amra?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe I can say that this instrument guidance of ICOMOS and ICROM gives a framework that might be very instructive for the community, local community, the Majdaleen, and also for the national authorities. So it gives also some kind of the background meaning of the global importance of heritage. So if you are asking how to proceed, what are the steps to be done, etc., please address this guidance that you can find at the web page of ICROM and ICOMOS, and the documents that are listed as references for each of its parts or chapters under each of the chapters. It can be, I think, useful, and also those documents, some of which are toolkits, are also useful. It also gives full information, listing these documents about the networks and international networks and organizations that are involved in this post-disaster recovery, that might be involved in post-disaster recovery, who can be addressed. I don't know if your question was more particular nature. I am not able to talk about any kind of the financial support, but what I can suggest in each of these cases is that experts base their work on ethnographic studies. Ethnographic studies means work with the community. When I say community, it's pretty big word. Maybe with the people who live, who attach themselves to the heritage sites, and try through these ethnographic studies to understand what that heritage means to them, how the reconstruction of heritage can mean recovery of themselves, their feeling of belonging to a certain place, and healing their personal and social trauma. And also, through ethnographic studies, experts will be informed about local vernacular practices, heritage practices that we have been pushing a little bit away, or at the margin, being somehow overwhelmed with this authorized heritage discourse, which is very much based on academia, let's say westernized, Eurocentric, chartered approach. So vernacular heritage practices are extremely informative, and they are also the part of heritage that should be addressed to the ethnographic studies. And for that purpose, I suggest to you and to everyone who is interested to read the books of our colleague Trevor Marchant, Professor Emeritus, who in fact developed the whole knowledge about the meaning of heritage through his ethnographic studies and working with the masters in Mali, in Yemen, and across Africa.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for your answer, Dr. Amra.
Welcome.
Thank
Please,
you. It's good to hear from you, by the way. As you know, I'm now at university, so I know that you sent something also along these lines, and I will still to provide you with some assistance, but I am in a different position, just to let you know. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Pleased to meet you too, Dr. Zaki. Hope we can be in touch very soon, inshallah.
Of course.
Inshallah. Thank you both for your presentation again.
Thank you.
Are there any questions?
There is Mr. or Mrs. Besnik Sinani.
Yeah. Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to both the presenters. So I actually teach Islamic theology at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and part of my research has been to look into sites of Islamic heritage in the Hijaz, and especially those that serve as points of contestation in Medina, like the burial tomb of the Prophet ﷺ, and similar sites. As you might be aware, there is a massive project of museum building, especially in the Hijaz, and other observers have pointed out of this concern that museums might at times, or especially when museums become part of a larger tourist industry that serves as its own form of erasure of history. So kind of my question would be in two parts, and I would be very happy if any of you or if both of you can pick up the response to that. So on one hand, right, how can we address the concerns that this museumification represents its own form of erasure? As Talal Asad famously pointed out, museumification is a form of secularization of sacred objects. The moment that you put them in a museum, they become secularized, and they become detached from the environment where they are supposed to be, to serve a sacred ritual. On the other hand, can we have a larger conversation over sites of heritage that transcend the dire interest of a specific nation? And can we kind of initiate a larger conversation over the significance for people globally? So I'll leave it at that, and I'll be very interested to hear from both of you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Besniksyan. Actually, talking about museums and museification, I didn't have the chance to talk about the project that we have also been involved in about the notion of museums. And as you know, even the ICON has worked on changing the definition of a museum. If I have actually a chance, I can show you some pictures of the project that we developed in Sudan to look at what we called community museums. So instead of thinking about the museums as places where heritage is isolated from either from context or from the people, the idea of community museums, or the notion of community museums, has actually a new how to say, a new way of making sure that museums can be places of reconciliation, places where people can share their cultural heritage, and people where they can celebrate even their culture. So, in fact, through this project, that I don't know if I'm able to show you a few images from that project. I have only 2 images which I didn't manage to put during the presentation. I don't know if you can see these images. So we worked on this notion of community museums in Sudan, where, of course, we had to, in this case, actually, these were historic houses, housing objects and cultural heritage. But more, and we worked on the physical, tangible aspects of conservation, being it of the built heritage, in this case, mud brick, as you see in front of you, but also the collections, the variety of collections and how they were managed. But more importantly, we looked, and this is actually a story that we call it a story of change, where we looked at these places and not only that, in fact, also they have ethnographic collections, I have to say, which they belong directly to people's lives. This is actually in line with what Dr. Amra was also talking about, the importance of ethnographic studies in this case. So we looked at the intangible heritage and how people can express the intangible heritage also and use the community spaces where, you know, people from different backgrounds, in this case of Sudan, a conflict area where they came together, they celebrated the heritage. So these places have become not only places of objects, but also places where people's heritage is being celebrated, being it, you know, the objects themselves, but also the intangible aspects. So you can see here in the pictures people having folklore dances. They have their cuisine celebrated. They have their traditional, you know, knowledge being celebrated in these museums. I don't have enough pictures to show you, but just to give you an idea that even the notion of museums is also in evolution. And the new definition of icon actually stresses this aspect of community. And we should really now think about museums in a direction that would not really, or would address, I have to say, would address your concerns in terms of like being places where everything is isolated from the people. So I don't know if I answered your question, but just to give you an example of how, you know, working in the museum field can also enhance the relationship between the people and the community. They're not only for tourists, they're also at large for the people and for the communities. In this case, it helped also for people to come together of different backgrounds, different beliefs, and what united them was heritage and their cultural heritage. So this is just for you the answer of perhaps your first question. So I hope it's satisfying, but anyway, we can talk more about it. Your other question was, can you repeat your other question, please?
Yeah, sure. So basically, there are, in a way, every historical site, in a way, is part of a global heritage. So in some way, we all partake in it, but especially when it comes to the sites in Hijaz, which, as it is well known, there have been the sites of massive demolitions. Can we start a conversation where the kind of decision making over these sites is not limited to a one nation alone, but it becomes a part of a shared contribution and concern and decision making of the larger Muslim community?
Right. Well, I'll say a few things, but then I give it to Dr. Amra to continue, perhaps. I want to start by saying that the idea of when the World Heritage Convention was, you know, ratified by various member states. The idea is to look at places of outstanding universal value, which is practically places of humanity or for humanity, people at large, as you are saying, like global, they belong to the world, not only to a specific nation. So this idea of World Heritage was really at the heart of this concept of global shared heritage. I have to draw your attention to the fact that with the sister of IRCICA, the OIC, they are also developing also a similar concept of global heritage for Muslim people. So in a way, like it's not only for the people of a certain country, but also for the people whose heritage actually is of relevance, you know, to the place. So this is a new concept. I don't know how successful it will be, but it's new, and maybe it has some potential to look at least before getting into the world humanity aspect, to look also at the shared heritage on the level of the Muslim Arab communities. I don't know if I hope that this will help, but it's just to give you more information about what's happening also in this area. Yeah. I don't know, Dr. Amra, if you want to add something.
There would be a lot to discuss about what you have raised with these two extremely important questions. What I can say, Dr. Desnik-Sinani, I hope that I will meet you in September at our conference on Marian studies in Muslim traditions.
No, I wasn't. I did visit Sarajevo, but it was last March. The Faculty of Islamic Studies.
Yeah, we have a conference with Tübingen University organized in September on Lady Mary.
Oh yes, I will. I plan to be there.
Okay. So I hope that we will have plenty of time to discuss these important issues, and what I can say, I'm looking forward to the results of your important research. As we all know, Saudi Arabia is shifting approach to cultural heritage, dramatically shifting approach to cultural heritage now, and that shifting approach, or the heritagization of the sites, places, and musealization of the approach to heritage has to pass all its phases. And I think in the first phases it is now very much influenced by the authorized heritage discourse. That does not work perfectly in Muslim heritage practices, I can say. However, I think it's very good for a number of the leading world experts that are now operating in Saudi Arabia to somehow invite these contextuality of Muslim heritage practices, especially concerning the central places for the Muslim identity across the board. So there are some mutable and unmutable difference, and sort of constant places, sites, heritage, rituals, etc., orientations in Muslim context. And what is constant and universal for all Muslims is in fact this orientation toward the Kaaba, and of course the meaning of the three sacred places, Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. Their formation, the traditions of their formation, their sacrality, etc. Concerning the museums that are built, I think that the museum in this conservative approach in fact reflect this fragmentation of heritage, they are divorcing from the sites and people that they belong, this obsession with the fragments, that is the part of the colonial approach. And in fact, the first museums are results of the colonial stealing of the heritage fragments. However, the idea of the museum, as Dr. Zaki has explained, is approaching more the needs of the people, who attach them to heritage, and this example of the community museum in Sudan is one of the very good examples. There is a similar one in Palestine that we shortlisted for the Award of Excellence, the jury that I was honored to work in, when ICROM, in fact, that Dr. Zaki led, ICROM office in Sharjah, established. I am against anything that does not perceive heritage as a living issue, as something that is not about past, not even about the future. It is something that we produce at this moment as something that expresses our need to be positioned in the thread of continuity, to catch this thread of continuity by our hands. These, let's say, silsila, if it is, I don't know if it is. So it is our, some kind of the part of the beat in this continuity. How do we need it? How we feel our place on it, and how we identify the center of our world. So anything what is putting heritage into something what is artificial, what belongs to the these like glass shells, what is catching the dust, is against my approach to heritage. I do not find any reason to deal with it. And concerning the issue of both Saudi Arabian sacred sites that are centers of the world for Muslims across the world, and right to let's say, think about them, not to manage, but to think about them, to contribute, to discuss about them, etc. It has been a long-lasting issue. Has been a lasting issue, and we have started some discussions, but it is extremely important now to look forward to the Saudi Arabian authorities to accept these discussions and to open the discourse. And once the discourse is open, and it can be based only on theory, that is why it is important to develop the body of theory, to research and to publish, and then to open, to start this, to establish this sort of field of discourse. So I think I can hope that it is the future. I can hope that it is the future. And I'm very much looking forward to the results of yoga. They are desperately needed.
This sounds great. In fact, I now at the university teaching Islamic art and heritage, so I would like to learn more about your research also. So, but anyway, I hope we will stay in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe if there is a question, we can accept it as a last question. Yep. Abdullah Cemal is. Yes, Abdullah Cemal, the floor is yours. Please ask your question.
Hello, hi everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Abdullah Jamwan. I'm an architect working for internet of the historic cities of Mosul and Basra in Iraq. It's a pleasure to hear you again, Professor Amra and Dr. Aslan. Many thanks for the wonderful presentation that we have listened to and also for the important responses that you provided. So,
Mr. Jamal, would you mind?
Houses in my city were all.
Can you raise your voice a little bit? It's a bit.
Sorry?
Can you raise your voice?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Of course. So I've been working in the rehabilitation of historic houses in my city for almost 4 years now. I heard Professor Amra at one point saying that the core value of the core historic value of heritage lies not only in the physical value of buildings themselves, but on the peoples and the type of use they provide for these buildings is more important. And that's where the intangible heritage and tangible heritage cross between themselves. So my question is, we've been working in the rehabilitation of historic houses and trying to accommodate them to the modern lifestyle that the people have adopted. So by adding modern intervention in some points, adding service spaces in the houses, adding spaces like, so the original planning of the houses didn't contain toilets or bathrooms or even kitchens at some point. So in gearing up these facilities within each unit that we're working into, because we are providing rehabilitation for the private users. We're not only doing work for the state board of antiquities or the state itself, but we're doing work for people who are living it itself, doing more harm than benefiting the territory that we're working in. And what is the limit to our work? Where lies the boundaries?
Amra, you want me to say something? All right, I don't know if Mr. Jamal, are you asking me or Dr. Amra? Because I also talked about that in a way, how...
I'm asking both actually. I'm
right.
asking for
okay.
all the point of views that I can get.
Well, first of all, let me start by saying what Dr. Amra mentioned, that our work in preservation in general, in conservation, and in your case, in historic houses, is really about, it's not about the past, it's also about the present and how we want these places to be in our present. So let me start by saying that there is no, I mean, conservation is not really about, freezing the past. Of course, you need to have commodities of the present, you need to be up to date with the current requirements of commodities for the life. But at the same time, there are some, you were asking about the limitations, and this is really about, a full lecture, I have to say. It's really about conservation theory, and at the heart of which is the concept of authenticity, or the notion, I should say, of authenticity. So, in fact, we need to look at the what constitutes this heritage, and in the case of the houses, of course, they have their owners, they have their structures, their material, and also the people who own them. So they have, of course, they should have a say and they should be aware of the fact that by keeping the history as much as possible, reflecting, you know, the main, how to say, essence, if you want, of the past, but using it in the present and the future is really important. So practically, we are talking about conservation principles, and this is what the charters, the guidance that Dr. Amra talked about, is all about. So there are certain principles embedded in the conservation charters, and I have to say, in addition to the work that we did with ICOMOS on reconstruction, we have translated all the conservation charters in Arabic. So you might be interested also to look at the conservation charters produced by our sister organization, now I'm not anymore there, but the sister organization ICOMOS, and now these are available in Arabic. So maybe, because, you know, it can be a long answer, but I just want to let you know that these principles are also available now, so you could also check them. But the basis of all that is really the notion of authenticity. So you need to think about what constitutes, what attributes you have that are important to keep the values of these historic houses you are working on, and therefore to make informed decisions as to how you conserve them. I know my answer is a bit generic, but I think, and of course because I don't know the houses, but at the same time I think I hope that I'm guiding you to see where you can find the information and the best information to go ahead. Thank you very much. Dr. Amra, would you like to add?
Yeah, especially because it's Abdullah. I'm so happy to see you and Allah, and I don't know if there is anyone else from the alumni network of International Summer School Youth and Heritage that we have organized for 19 years now. And Abdullah, together with the other 3 experts from Mosul working in reconstruction of Mosul, was one of the attenders of the school 2 years ago. Extremely important, and I'm so happy that this alumni network is in fact working. So thank you very much for listening, thank you very much for questions. As you know, I was in Mosul several times, and thanks to you and Omar and Anas and Mustafa, I in fact visited the houses that you have been working on, and I know very well what you are talking about. So there is extremely important information here that old city of Mosul and these wonderful houses that no one who didn't see them cannot imagine. So it's the beauty beyond any kind of imagination of the residential buildings, courtyard residential buildings, with these wonderful alabaster facades, entrances, window frames, etc., and the organization that is organizing the family life in Muslim context. They were abandoned long before the war in Mosul and destruction of Mosul, because people wanted to go across the river and build a new modern house in which they will have a comfortable life in accordance to the modern demands of life, with the bathrooms, with the modern kitchens, with the heating system, with the air condition, etc. So that's why the house is deteriorated, and in fact the gentrification was the main problem for the old city of Mosul. Only those who could not provide for better, let's say, residence, they stayed there, and they didn't have money, means, power, etc. to maintain them properly. So the whole beautiful old city of Mosul was exposed to all these problems, that were recognized in, let's say, European centers in 60s, late 60s, as gentrification. So this ossification of heritage, do not touch them, do not change them, etc., was recognized as a threat to the life of heritage. So in 70s, and especially 1975, this concept that Dr. Zaki mentioned in his lecture of integrated conservation was developed, and it went in parallel with the living heritage concept. So the heritage that is alive, that is used, that is appropriated to our needs, is in fact the heritage that does not atrophy. So, Abdallah, it is very important to know when you work, and you know that cultural heritage is not a static construct. It is about resources from the past that involve a capacity for reflecting, expressing, or affirming values, beliefs, understandings, and customs, which are in themselves in constant process of evolving. So nothing is like static. So when you work, you identify the values and find the attributes of the values. If attribute of the value is a way of life, way of use of the inner courtyard, if attribute of the value is alabaster facade, so attributes of the values, of those the most important values, and these attributes of the values should be enhanced. The other elements, so you will not make, for example, a new kitchen that destroys alabaster facade in a courtyard. You will not make a kitchen that destroys a way of life, that does not enable separation of public and private family life. So all of these, bathrooms are needed, electricity is needed, air conditioning is needed, but you will not put the air conditioned AC these edifices or the boxes so that they destroy the integrity of the beautiful facade, or that they destroy the frames of the. So that is always a subject of critical approach by the conservation experts or groups, and also consultations between the experts and those who use the heritage. And it is always about the values, the attributes, and the living heritage. So the site should be comfortable to live in, people should want to live in it because they feel comfortable, but it also should, the main attributes of the values should be preserved or even restored if it is needed. So the whole process should be the minimal needed intervention. So it's up to you to identify what is the minimal needed intervention, and each intervention should be done, if it is possible, and whenever it is possible, in a reversible way. So if you put air condition now, it should be done, you should calculate that it should be done maybe in a more intrusive way or a better way in the future, that you will have something that is more. Also, the use of these vernacular knowledge, wind catchers, different kind of the elements should be done. But I advocate very much for living heritage. No old house without bathroom, no old house without warm water, no old house, etc., so that people want to live in it, and they gradually sort of adapted through generations. We have never had, it's known in history of Muslim heritage practices, that none of the mosques in Mali, in Yemen, in Bosnia has been like conserved and fixed in the period when it was constructed. There were families who were gradually adapting them to the needs and always understanding what is unmutable. And unmutable are attributes of the highest values. So, as Dr. Zaki said, this is for the whole lecture. I know, Abdullah, that you put this question as a rhetorical one and that you are very well aware of how to work. You were one of the memorable students in the school, and also the work that you do, that you work in Mosul, that I have seen is amazing. And I think you should talk about that.
Thank you.
Now, I think we finished questions. We have to finish our program now. Many thanks to everybody who attended, and also especially to Dr. Amra and Dr. Zaki for their insightful talks. Hope to see you in the next Heritage Talk program. We will continue to discuss these issues, especially cultural heritage issues, especially in Islamic world, in Muslim world, and also all around the world. Thank you for participation. See you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you.
I'm also very grateful for this invitation and opportunity, and I'm very honored that you, in fact, coupled Dr. Zaki and me.
Yeah, me too.
It's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you again. Thank you for accepting our invitation. All the best. Kapatabilirsin. Süpersin.
Hocam nasıl geçti?
Bence iyiydi.
İyiydi.
Konuşmacılar da sıkıydı. Sorular da çok yerindeydi. Onlara ayrıca bir teşekkür yazısı yazacağım. Evet yani abicim ben mouse'umu klavyemi alırım.
Aha. Hocam
Vermem.